We made it.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
There's Avignoni.
bringing you this week's Ascended World. Good morning, Yasmin. So people, all of us keep on saying, what direction do I take? How do I change, directions? What is the universe trying to tell me, or my expanded self? And today we're going to talk about navigating those directions, if we can.
Right. I think the important thing that in the discussion today we can talk about is, we talk about guidance, we talk about hidden messages. Why don't we just call it guide? Look for evidence.
Yeah.
What are the things showing up that are evidence of something? It almost makes it like, a mystery game or one of those what is it, murder rooms or whatever, where you have to, everything has meaning. And it's like, if we just put that context to everything, we might find that we're not as lost as we believe that we are.
Well, and it's interesting because I realized in conversations that I had this weekend with some people outside of my normal social group,
right?
that we get so hung up in the evidence-based idea, right? Of what does that mean, right? And we get so hung up in things. We get so hung up in what do other people tell us? What do textbooks tell us? What do,
Facebook
all these, yeah. Oh yeah, what does Facebook tell us? Because it must be true.
Must be true.
But we get so hung up in that we really shut down any understanding of our connection. It was interesting because I was actually having a conversation with a science teacher, a high school science teacher, right? Who is very, very pragmatic in terms of, this is how it's said. And so the funny part was as the conversation progressed though, and I was like, well, okay, have you studied quantum physics at all? And it was like, well, I've sort of touched on it, but I don't really I don't really
intro in college.
right. Or was in a physics course where we talked about it for one class and then that was about it, that kind of thing, but it was like, well, yeah, but I don't really understand it. And I'm like, okay, well, but quantum physics is what straddles the consciousness and the science, right?
It's the bridge. It's the, I want to say the string and string theory.
Right. And so, but the thing is, and at that point, I just sort of, I was like, okay. And this person was great in terms of saying, it's not that I don't personally believe in this stuff, but I honor other people's journeys and what they believe. And I find it fascinating that we all have such different perspectives. And it ended up turning into a really great conversation about how nothing is actual fact except what you think it is because of your own perspective and your own filter. So we at least got that far in the conversation, which I thought was great. Right. And that's the whole funny thing is just thinking about, and that conversation was probably an hour and a half long to get there. Right. And to even get there without even talking about anything specific. Because I did at one point say something about, because we did start talking about perspective and psychology, and then we started talking about vibration, which then allowed me to tie it back around to, well, that's what quantum physics is all about, is how this all ties in, right, into our physical realities. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I'm just saying, so I was like, no. So we can spend days, months, years just talking about those semantics, right? And then all the time ignoring the fact that we have all the answers sitting right in front of us.
I mean,
and not even get to.
And that's aside from the fact that we have access to everything, even if it's not sitting right in front of us.
Right. Well, because technically it is, whether we think
we acknowledge it or not.
Exactly. So, that was a great conversation because it made me look at that in terms of, and I didn't even realize until last night when I was looking at my notes from what we discussed on Friday. Oh, look at how relative that was, right?
Right. Well, and I had a conversation this weekend with someone about our creation, our creative, our Wonder Vision board class, and how we're shifting from things to the energy behind the things. Right. And we had a great conversation, and they really got it. And they go, okay, so enough about that talk. Let's go back to this. And it's like, but that talk is what everything is all the time, whether you acknowledge it or not. Right. And it was like, oh, that was a great conversation, but I'm just going to package it up and set it on the shelf until I'm ready to talk about it again. Right. It's like, but you're doing it whether it's on the shelf or not. It's whether you acknowledge it or not, or whether you embody it, embrace it, empower it, disempower it, you're still doing it.
Right. And so it's so many levels. Again, as everything that we talk about is so many levels, right? There's even the level of entry to even talk about it as a possibility, right? That's like step number like 1A.
Right.
And so, we get through these levels of consciousness and understanding and remembrance, and then we start talking about other things. Because, and I sort of laugh because there's so much out there. It's like, oh, well, now we have this is evidence-based. So what's evidence-based?
Right.
Or, like, and there are things that, now the psychological community is, requiring, like they're getting into this consciousness bandwagon. Of course, it connects in perfectly, which we've been talking about for years, right? And so now the psychology thinks to make it legitimate, they have to call it evidence-based.
Right.
And so it's like, well, and I'm not judging that. It's how we work. It's how we work in the 3D, right? We are used to allowing ourselves to being ruled by the logical mind. So the mind says it has to be evidence-based. Well, okay. So when you shift the perspective on what evidence-based means, and we start looking now at, okay, well, I'm asking for guidance on something, right? I'm open to that. I am acknowledging that I have all the answers, that I have access to all the answers, that I simply have to remember them. And I have to allow my expanded self or the universe or the quantum field or whatever you want to call it to show me the answer, right? That's the evidence base that we're asking for. So give me that answer to remember. And it's not learning, it's not proving, it's simply being in a different way.
Right. And another word for that is simply observing.
Yes.
And being receptive to noticing everything.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's to saying that, it's getting to a place of saying that everything around us is some form of evidence. It's either evidence to prove something or evidence to prove against something, evidence to show me that something is my truth, or evidence to show me that it's not, right?
Right.
And if we
and the nice thing about that is that the evidence isn't good or bad. It just is. It's almost the being is the neutral, and the doing is the positive or the negative that's applied to it.
Right. What a difference existing from there is.
Right.
And that's what we're doing with our Wonder Vision board course, is taking the things out of it, the doing part. And yes, it's a part of it, but it's actually running it off of a base of being, right? Being worthy, trusting, like being in a place of allowing guidance, right? Being in acceptance and gratitude, being in self-responsibility, being in acceptance and gratitude of the integration of the shadow, and being in self-love. and being in self-love. And those are the aspects that we focus on of the underlying part of our creation board, which makes a huge difference in the way our creations are formed and our intentions are formed. And that's more evidence-based, because then it aligns more with who we are, because in the things that show up in those energies are the evidence, right, that show us that we have them.
Right. I mean, and you can, and there's evidence of this in so many things. As you were talking, I was just seeing the difference between like H2O, which is 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. Then there's H3O, which is ozone, which is 3 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. And you look at the difference. One is life-giving, life-sustaining, and the other one is like a disinfectant.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get to heavy water, which I don't even know what that is, but it's still a water, and it's deadly. And it's like, but it's still the same essences, essentially, just used differently.
In different content and different constructs, right?
Right, and different combinations. And it's like, that's what we're talking about, is getting back to those basic essences, using the evidence to then combine those essences to create the outcome we want.
Yes. And so it makes it, well, if we take out the word guidance and we just put evidence, right, then that just makes it a complete, that is funny, because then the ego / mind goes, oh, okay, I can buy that.
I can do that.
Yes.
Some woo-woo message or esoteric guidance.
Yeah.
Different.
Right.
And I mean, even if you come down to, we talk about in guidance that there's, it's just a knowing. But what happens is there's a physical reaction in that knowing, as your heart rate probably comes down.
Yes.
Your blood pressure probably lowers, your respiration lowers, everything. So there's the evidence.
Yes.
There's the evidence, because you have that understanding and that knowing that something is true, versus the conflict of the not knowing, which creates the elevated heart rate and the elevated respiration and the blood pressure. And probably even there's some dilation in the pupils of the eyes in the difference.
Yes.
So that's your evidence.
Right. And that's the thing that we connect to the psychology, is when we know something to be true, those things actually do happen in our physical bodies.
Yes.
And as we become more conscious and aware, part of presence is being fully aware of your physical body, and being, like there's a whole area of what they call applied kinesiology, right? In terms of consciousness, where or muscle testing. Well, they've shown that actually shows true for what you hold to believe is true in your body. Your muscles and cells react in different ways, with resistance or compliance, right? Fluidity or resistance. I don't want to say compliance, fluidity. And so that's really what the basics of, if you've never heard of muscle testing before, look it up. It's really fun, because when you first learn it, you're like, oh no, that's crazy. I remember teaching my kids that years ago, and I was showing them that, like, literally you can ask somebody at conscious level, right, without even saying the words, a question about their health, about their understanding about them.
Right.
And you don't even have to say it out loud. So there's the whole thing of, oh, well, that's just that's like a conscious decision. No, you can do it without even asking the question out loud. You can just connect with them energetically. And it's this whole thing where you hold your arm up, right? And then your arm stays strong for yes. And it, right? Is it yes?
Weak for no.
And it weakens for no. So that when you press on it with just like mild pressure, it'll push the arm down. But if it's yes, it stays strong. You can do that without asking the person the question straight out.
Right.
And so that's right there, shows a lot about our consciousness and energy, and where we hold these evidence-based things, right? these truths to ourselves, which are all relative to our individual journeys. That's part of the ego's, thing. So this is how it all connects all together. All these dots connect together. And that's the most basic form of what we're talking about in consciousness. So there's no belief system needing to be behind that. That's the evidence-based thing that we're talking about. But so when we start looking at that and we start trusting that, so it's like going back to, like I said, 1A, which is learning that our consciousness is really aware and connected into the whole quantum field, the universe, the expanded consciousness, our God, or whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing, And it's all there. And we have access to all of it. It's a matter of accessing and allowing ourselves to do that. So there are many doorways now that allow you to do that. Because we've created them, because the mind says, well, I need evidence.
Right.
The ego. And so we get to a place of, all right, now let's fast forward into step, I don't know, 10B, right? Of, okay, I accept that I get guidance. I accept all of that, but I'm asking for guidance and I'm not getting it.
Right.
And that's the biggest time to step back and say, all right, so what evidence am I asking? What evidence am I looking for, or am I not looking for? Or what other way can I look at it to give myself that evidence, right? To show me what's right in front of my face that I'm being blind to, the white elephant in the room, so to speak.
Right. And most of the time for myself, I find that it's something that I just have accepted and no longer see anymore. And it's like, they talk about, I don't know. For myself, it's like if I go and I stay in a hotel room, which, is very undecorated. It's very sparse, Spartan, surfaces are cleaned off, and I'm there for a while and I adjust and I come home and it's like, wow, I've got a lot of stuff. And I didn't feel that way when I left, because they talk about nasal fatigue, where you smell something so much that you get to where you don't smell it anymore. Right. This was visual fatigue, where you just don't see it anymore.
Right.
So I think that when you get in that place of, well, I'm just not getting answers, it's like you're just not looking to see them in how they are appearing.
Or you're judging them. Or you're judging them when they come in. So
and
then
say, this can't be the answer.
Yes. Or I can't be getting the answer this way.
Right.
It's just a coincidence.
But that has nothing to do with this.
Right.
Everything has everything to do with everything.
Right. When we start looking at the interconnectedness of everything, and that's a scientific, you want to look at scientific things, there's the interconnectedness of everything. Right. And when we can accept all that, it does jump right over into consciousness and understanding. So that's the whole thing. And if we take all of the belief system stuff out of it, right, whatever you believe, whether it's angels or God or your higher self or your expanded self or whatever you want to even consider, right?
Something as simple as the numerology. Like, I only get my messages through repeating numbers, or I only get my messages through dreams.
Right.
Even if it's an expanded form, if you limit yourself, you're still.
Or science.
Limiting.
I only get my answers through science.
Right.
Science. So
even those that study the genes, and now that we've do all the genetic testing, and you need to eat this and you shouldn't eat this and this and this and this, even those scientists and medical professionals who practice epigenetics acknowledge that there's a piece that you play to influencing your genes.
Right. They've done research now that shows that we influence the way our genes react, even though we have that DNA blueprint, right? That we can change our DNA through our thoughts and our thoughts entirely. there's another straddling of, whatever, thought into evidence, thought into matter, or whatever. But so all this stuff, and we don't need to go into that whole thing, but really the importance is we're sitting here saying, I'm looking for guidance. I don't know what to do next. And the answer really is, yes, you do. You just have yet to connect the dots,
right,
of what you're telling yourself, or what blank
right.
is telling you. Right.
Right. And I mean, evidence comes in such different packages, whether it's, God, I'm so tired of seeing that commercial on TV. I wonder if there's something in that message.
Right.
Or I always see, the color red, or I always, it's something that just keeps repeating to the point where you notice.
Right. Right. And it's funny because I've done those exercises with people who've come to see me in sessions or whatever. And I remember one time a woman came in, and I think she had gotten a session from like a raffle that I had, put in a session for or whatever. And she never had anything like this. Or it was a set of 3 sessions. And I said, okay, so over the 3 sessions, because she wanted to learn how, to tap into more of what we call intuition or whatever. And I said, okay, well, first is to recognize all of this. And we talked about this, the evidence, the messages, the guidance, all kind of stuff. And I said, okay, so between now and the next session, I want you to journal, keep a notebook with you. Anything that seems consistent, out of the ordinary, or just, interesting, I want you to just jot down. You don't have to make any big dissertation about it. You can simply just jot down. And then, come back and report. And so I can't remember if it was the second or the third session, but she came back and she goes, so I noticed a pattern. So you said about colors, and that's what it's reminded me of. And she goes, 3 different times I was thinking about a problem or something that I'm trying to solve, or, and I happened to look up, or where I was looking, all I saw was red. She goes, and it was really odd. She goes, first I was sitting at a light in the car, and I look up, and there's somebody with a red shirt, and right behind them is a red, sign in a window of a store or whatever. And she's like,
right.
And she goes, and the first time I thought, oh, that's interesting. She goes, the second time I was at a soccer game or something. And she goes, and I looked up, and it was the same thing. It was all in the line of vision. There was red. And then the third time she was like, okay, this is sort of crazy. Right.
Right.
And I said, so when that happens, I said, to me, what I hear is red flag. Right. So meaning that whatever was you were thinking at that moment was a red flag, or a note that ding, 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 ding. Look at this. This is really a key to what the question is. Right.
Right.
Your answer. And she was like, is it that easy? And I was like, it is that easy.
Right.
Because we don't believe, we put so much song and dance around mysticism, what people call mysticism. And it's really not mystical at all, because it simply just is the way we everything reflects back to itself. Good morning, Michael.
Right.
And so, and it was just funny, because that's what happens when I work with people, to even show them how to pay attention to guidance, which they claim they don't have. Right. I love when people say I'm about as intuitive as a rock. And then I'm always like, so have you ever worked with crystals?
Right.
But the thing is, I'm like, there's nothing to think is because we still think it's something secret.
Right. Or only special people have it.
Right. A very, idealize in a certain way, instead of saying it's every day. It's as common as me getting out of bed in the morning. It's everything I do. It's a matter of me putting together. And that's where the puzzle part comes, like you're talking about.
Right.
So let me put it together and say, what could this mean that I'm not seeing otherwise?
Right. Well, and when you apply the term evidence to it, it becomes more of oh, well, I can look for evidence.
Yes.
I can't look, I don't know how to look for guidance, but I can look for evidence.
Right. So that's all you do, is take the word guidance out of the sentence and make it evidence, right? Evidence from the universe, evidence from the quantum field. Right. If that makes you feel better, because it sounds more scientific, say evidence from the quantum field.
Right.
Evidence. We are all broken down.
It was interesting. I was looking into how field of psychology is using, this evidence-based to get into, coping skills,
Yes.
which, is really navigation.
Right.
And it's interesting how they've taken evidence-based things and just changed the language and giving you coping skills just in different terminology, like coping skills, go take a walk, go feed some animals, play with your dog. And it's like, yeah, that's why hiking is so popular.
Right. Right. Well, and when we start talking about it in the more conscious standpoint, we say because plants have consciousness. Now they have proven that, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Not only do they have consciousness, but if you've ever meditated with one and connected in energy with one, you realize how beautiful and solid and present like a tree is.
Yes.
And we realize that when we're in a place that has a lot of trees, we then naturally get absorbed into their auric field, which then allows us to get into a better presence of being, because then we want to emulate that feeling because it feels so free. Right. So there is an explanation of why we feel better when we're out in nature. But, when we say it in the terms of psychology of, oh, yeah, go outside and take a walk, it'll make you feel better. Like we don't typically explain this is why it makes you feel better.
Exactly. It's just, here's something to satisfy your mind. Go distract yourself with this.
When it's really not a distraction. It's just, it is an exercise in being. Right. And you know what? It's all great. There's no judgment on any of it because it's however we need to get there is how we get there. Right?
Exactly. But I find it interesting that it's just taking the same concept and changing the language around it. And it's like, oh, I can do that. Right.
It's translating it into another language that you understand better. I don't know, that we have from a common groundwork. But
well,
the thing is,
I think it also takes away any judgments. It's like, oh, I can take a walk. I can't go out and meditate in nature, but I can take a walk.
Right. Even though that's a meditation.
It's the same thing. Right. Exactly.
Don't say the M word to me. Just don't say the M word.
Right.
That's proofy stuff.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, so now like many who watch this are those who are already past that, right? And into the place of understanding that we do receive guidance in pretty much everything, at least to some extent, is understood. But the key here is don't get lost. So here was the thing. I even got lost because I started judging stuff this weekend, right? So then I sort of got lost in the judgment, and that's what we do. The ego wants to get lost in the judgment of, blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to do this, or I don't want to be a part of this, and da, da, da. And then I had to step back and say, but if I was, it was perfect. If I am a part of this, it's perfect. What is it showing me that I'm not otherwise looking at?
Right.
And I realized that was part of the evidence to me of needing that translation, right? Because many don't understand how pragmatic it actually is. Like there's nothing woo-woo or mystical or like elusive about it.
Right. And that's if you think about that, that's why it's so specific to the individual. Because you can see red and see one thing, and somebody else can see red and they have a completely different feeling about it. Yes. So that makes that their evidence.
Yes.
Versus your evidence.
Right. And that's something that we talk about in teaching Trinity and whatever, about not translating a message when you're helping somebody to remember their messages, right? Or to remember their guidance, or to remember what it is they're not yet looking at, right? To say, like when we do sessions, a lot of times we'll get impressions, and sometimes people get colors. Sometimes people get, they see an object or they'll see something else. Then, like, because like you're saying, here's the thing. And that's an example that I use all the time. I can see red and think of love and passion and gushiness. And you could see red and think blood and danger
and inflammation and
anger,
aggression.
Yes.
And yeah.
So if I see that message for you and I see red and I say, oh, well, I see this and it's all red. And I say, oh, that's so beautiful and love-based. And you're, like, and like your first inclination would be, oh no, that's an anger.
Yeah. And to withdraw.
Right.
Right.
Then that's what happens in mistranslations when people go to, say, psychics, or however you want to look at it, right? Psychics or energy workers or whatever. And because we also then many believe that it adds value to the work that we do by trying to translate for the person, but that actually does a disservice to the other person, because we can't translate for them what their filters will perceive it as, because that's the intention for how it's supposed to get to them.
Yeah. Michael has a comment. I'm starting to believe my ego is getting more powerful since I'm getting these judgments too. And I wouldn't even notice them unless they were so big in my face.
Yeah. Well, you mean
it sounds like you're hitting on something that the ego's reluctant to let go of, or reluctant to look at.
Or acknowledge even, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, no, you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. Yeah. I even had a dream last night that I woke up and I was I was a little disturbed by, kept me up for a little bit before I went back to sleep. And this morning I was talking about it with my husband, and probably what it did was bring up something that had been nipping at me subconsciously that I still held. And so had I not had that dream, I probably wouldn't have brought it up, and it probably wouldn't have been a discussion that needed to happen. So it was all beautiful and beautifully laid out, because I know me. The bigger me, consciousness wise, knows me, right? It says, this is how we're going to get around to this, right? And so trust it and flow with it. But it had to trigger me first. It had to be a dream that triggered me, that woke me up, kept me up for a little while before I went back to sleep, so that I would remember it when I woke up in the morning and talk about it, because it bothered me or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what happened with me over the weekend, where I found I was judging something and feeling very, a lot of disdain for it, a lot of disconnection, a lot of, almost depression about it. Not the dream, just something else entirely. Right. And until yesterday, it sort of hit me. It was like, so you have obviously a lot of judgment around that. Well, what could that mean?
Right.
Obviously, there's a nugget in there for you to look at, right? Yes. And part of it had to do with, we tend to get into the belief of this is us versus them. Right. And there is no them. Right. When we truly accept, however you want to look at it, the quantum field, the universe, whatever, if you break it down into cells and whatever, we're all connected, right? So there's no stopping and starting. It's all connected into what makes up this set of dimensions, right? And everything else. So when you start looking at it that way, it's like, well, no matter how you look at it, we're all connected. It's all part of the same thing. So there is no us versus them or me versus them. It's like, you're me and I'm you, and all of this is me. This desk is me as much as, everything around me, and vice versa. So when we get into the mindset of, the biggest time to look at a big red flag is when we get into the mindset of us versus them, or me versus somebody else, or those people, or, like I always cringe. It's really funny. I always cringe when somebody around me will say, well, you people, blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yes.
And the cringe is a judgment, which means I somewhere in there have that in that I don't allow to come to the surface. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So when we start looking at it, it's like, we keep on talking about, looking at guidance and everything else, as long as it feels warm and fuzzy, but we don't like looking at it when it feels rocky and judgmental.
Right. Yeah.
And that's usually the filter that, well, not usually, it always is the filter of the ego that makes it that way, by the way. And so it's not to judge the ego, which is really the ego judging itself, right? It's simply for us to see it for what it is and for how it's serving us as a message in itself, right? By the trigger. That's what we use by the term trigger, by the judgment. And it's funny because we say trigger all the time. And yet I talk to people who are extremely conscious and whatever, and they'll be like, well, I'm not triggered by this, but I just think that blah, 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 blah. And as soon as you say, I think, that's a judgment. And then it's like, well, but that's your judgment, which means it's a trigger because it evokes an emotion in you that's like,
well, and when I think of the term trigger, it's something that sets you off.
Right, exactly.
Just like you pull the trigger on a gun and it sets the gun off, or the bomb, or the whatever. And it's like,
and those are the biggest messages we're giving to ourselves.
Right. That's your evidence.
And that's the evidence. So if you take out the word message and guidance, which we think is froofy and whatever, and just say, that's the evidence I'm giving myself. Well, then the ego goes, wait a minute. What do you mean by evidence I'm giving myself?
Right. It brings it back into, instead of being that esoteric term, it's like, oh, evidence. I can touch and feel. I can identify. I can locate that.
Yes. And so, so I guess today our clearing will have is to be around. I allow my guidance to be my evidence. Ooh, I allow, yeah. I allow that interconnection, or the
I acknowledge
I acknowledge that
my guidance is my evidence.
Yes, and evidence, and vice versa, and evidence is my guidance.
Yes.
And I can accept both as being the same. Easily and with flow and acceptance. That feels really good.
All right, let's do that.
Let's do that. All right, so everyone sit down, sit comfortably, take a deep breath. Close your eyes, open your heart, set ourselves the vibration where that is our truth. That is from where we exist, create, and experience. All right. I feel like I was just getting into that, but
yeah.
But I did see in the beginning, it was a lot of voices of the ego going, huh, I can see that. And there was nothing
Right.
for you.
Right. I had a lot of, so that means
Yes.
like the
Yes.
extrapolation out of, well,
Yes. Yes. That was actually really good. It felt good though. And then it quieted down.
Yeah, it did quiet down. Very much so.
So that's everybody's home play for this week, is to go and, let your evidence look at what your reality is showing you in evidence for your guidance.
Yes.
And that's where we start checking against our own truth. And sometimes it gives us a contrast of what we don't want to do. Sometimes it gives us an example of what there is something to do. So, I mean, it's an art and a skill in itself that we develop. I mean, it's constantly, you and I both are always like, well, because, it's a deep habit to break, to not accept it. And it's also a very lofty habit to develop, to accept everything as that, to everything as that evidence and guidance and whatever, because the ego is not used to being uncomfortable in that. Saying, oh, well, I'd rather judge that than really look at what's underneath it, kind of thing.
Yeah, the ego's goal is to always be comfortable.
Yes. And sometimes, that's what holds us back. Well, most of the time, that's what holds us back.
Right.
That avoidance of discomfort. So, and the discomfort itself is only just from the ego. So, circular.
Right. Exactly. So
that was lesson 101 on that. But, this was very timely because many are saying, I feel like I'm supposed to be changing direction and doing something very different, but I'm not getting the guidance. And yet there is evidence to show that it's right there in front of our faces. So, yeah. So absolutely. If we allowed that, if we just allow that, that's what we say when we open our hearts and allow all possibilities in the creation of those, the intended manifestation, the intended creation kind of thing. So, all right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni
signing off with this week's Ascended World. Have a great one.